Eleanor, let's get a divorce. Dr. Simon Pierce stood in the middle of the living room, tossing a ring of keys to a luxury estate onto the mahogany coffee table. He didn't even sit down. In his impeccably ironed suit, looking as if he had just stepped out of the OR, his entire demeanor radiated impatience. "This estate in Weston is yours," he said. "It's worth $5 million. That's enough to set you up for the rest of your life. Just sign the papers." I sat on the sofa, staring at him. There was someone standing behind him. The person hadn't stepped fully into the room, but I could clearly see a slender silhouette in the doorway, wearing pink medical scrubs and pristine white sneakers. It was Dr. Madison Bell, a surgical resident. She had just turned 24 this year, 8 years younger than me. Seeing my silence, Simon added, "Madison is 2 months pregnant. I have to take responsibility for her." He spoke with such a self-righteous tone, as if his infidelity was an act of profound virtue. I lowered my gaze to the keys on the table. The $5 million estate. He worked as the vice chair of surgery at a Boston hospital, bringing in an annual salary of around $450,000. This estate had been purchased by his father years ago, and put in Simon's name. Now, he was offering it to me as a divorce settlement generously, like a handout to a beggar. I reached out and picked up the pen. Simon was visibly taken aback. Perhaps he expected me to cry, scream, smash the china, or demand to know what made this young resident so much better than me. He had probably rehearsed a whole speech. "You're too controlling. You only care about your career. You don't know how to be affectionate." But I didn't say a word. I opened the divorce agreement and flipped through it page by page. The division of assets was clearly outlined. The Weston estate went to me. The remaining savings, investments, and cars went to him. We didn't have children, so custody wasn't an issue. It was clean and straightforward, like a surgical consent form. On the very last page, I signed my name, Eleanor Sterling. Simon's Adam's apple bobbed. He clearly hadn't expected it to happen so fast. "You're not even going to look at the property deed?" he asked. I slid the signed agreement back toward him. "I've already seen it. I won't give up a single cent of what is rightfully mine, and I don't want a single square foot of what isn't." I stood up, grabbed the keys, and walked right past him. Madison hurriedly stepped aside in the doorway, but she couldn't resist shooting me a glance. Her eyes held a mixture of triumph, defiance, and the smug superiority of a victor. I stopped, turned my head, and looked at her. Simon had bought it with my money. Just last month, I had transferred my $150,000 annual bonus into our joint checking account. "Madison Bell, right?" I asked. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Hello, Dr. Sterling," she said quietly. I smiled. I knew my smile was intimidating. "I have the keys to this estate in my hand," I told her. "If you ever want to live in it, you'll have to ask my permission first." Madison's face instantly went pale. Simon frowned. "Eleanor, don't make this difficult. The agreement is signed. The house is yours." I didn't say another word. I just walked out. That evening, I returned to my real home, not the McMansion in Weston, but a historic, federal-style townhouse in Beacon Hill that my mother had left me. When she passed away, she left me a real estate portfolio and trust funds worth over $15 million. Simon didn't know about this because I had never told him. For all 5 years of our marriage, I pretended to be a standard OB/GYN making a base salary of $250,000. I used to think humility was a virtue. Now, I realize that playing small only makes men think you're easy to walk all over. I walked into the private courtyard of my townhouse and tossed the Weston keys onto a stone patio table. Then, I carried a heavy cardboard box out of my home office. Inside were stacks of printed standard A4 papers, neatly bound, 327 peer-reviewed medical articles. I had written every single one of them. All of them were published under the name Simon Pierce. Over the past 5 years, he had managed to secure a coveted spot at a top-tier teaching hospital, achieve the rank of associate professor, and become vice chair of the department not because of his skills with a scalpel, but because of these papers. I had spent countless sleepless nights researching materials, running statistical analyses, and writing abstracts for leading medical journals. Every day, I laid another brick on his path to his current prestigious position. He thought I was obligated to do it. He thought it was my wifely duty to stay up late editing his manuscripts, brainstorming innovative surgical techniques, and fighting off the nitpicking of peer reviewers. What he didn't know was that I had kept the raw data for every single article. I had time-stamped records of my drafting process. If he had dared to cheat me on the divorce settlement, I could have stripped him of his entire career overnight. But I didn't. Not because I was magnanimous, but because he simply wasn't worth the effort anymore. I carried the box to the center of the courtyard fire pit and grabbed a long lighter. The first page caught fire. The flames licked the paper, sending black ash floating into the night air. Then the second. The third. Entire stacks of medical journals and manuscripts went into the fire, crackling loudly. The flames reflected off the brick walls of the historic townhouse, casting giant shadows. I didn't cry. I just sat by the fire and burned them, page by page. I burned them for 2 solid hours. When I reached the final page, I held it out and watched the name Dr. Simon Pierce be devoured by the flames. The ink blackened, the paper curled, and finally, it turned to ash. I burned away those 5 years. Simon, do you really think giving me that estate makes up for the last 5 years? You underestimate me. In 3 days, he was going to learn the true meaning of payback. The next morning, I went to Boston Metropolitan Hospital to file my resignation. Not out of heartbreak, but because I hadn't wanted to work there for a long time. I planned to convert one of my mother's commercial properties in Back Bay into a high-end private women's clinic. I had the skills, the experience, and the capital. There was no need to stay at a corporate teaching hospital and constantly run into Simon. After filing the HR paperwork, I walked out into the corridor and bumped right into him. He was in his pristine white coat talking to Dr. Harrison, the chief of surgery. Seeing me, Simon visibly tensed. I walked over and smiled. Good morning, Dr. Pierce. What are you doing here? He hissed under his breath. Resigning, I replied casually. He was stunned. Resigning? Are you out of your mind? You've been at this hospital for 6 years. You barely got your attending status. Why would you quit? I smiled breezily. Just feel like a change of scenery. Dr. Harrison, standing nearby, overheard and sighed with genuine regret. Dr. Sterling, are you sure you've thought this through? Your M&M reports are still on file. With your track record, you could be chief of obstetrics soon. It's a shame to lose you. Simon's face instantly changed. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Those M&M, morbidity and mortality, reports were another crucial set of documents I had written for him. They detailed all his surgeries over the past 2 years, including the true, unedited circumstances of 2 severe cases of medical malpractice. Those files weren't peer-reviewed articles. They were his blackmail material. He had begged me to rewrite the official charts because he couldn't cover his own tracks. And 3 days ago, I had used a proxy to hand the original, unedited charts over to his worst enemy, Dr. Victor Zeller, the other vice chair from general surgery. Victor had been gunning for the chief position for years, and the only thing he lacked was the ammunition to take Simon down. Now, he had the smoking gun. It's fine, I told Dr. Harrison. I've already handed those clinical reports to the appropriate party. Simon went pale as a sheet. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, his voice trembling. Eleanor, what do you mean? Who did you give the files to? I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist and pried his fingers off, one by one. Simon, you wanted a divorce, right? You wanted to take responsibility for her? Then go take responsibility. As for the patient files, that's your problem, not mine. With that, I turned and walked away. He shouted my name down the hallway, but I didn't look back. That very afternoon, Victor Zeller submitted the original files to the state medical board and the hospital's disciplinary committee. Simon's 2 botched surgeries were blown wide open. In one instance, during a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, he had severed a patient's common bile duct, resulting in emergency reconstructive surgery. In another, he ignored signs of severe postoperative hemorrhage, causing the patient to nearly die before being airlifted to another trauma center. Simon had buried both incidents, paying off one patient and altering the charts of the other. Now, it was all there in black and white. He could kiss the chief of surgery job goodbye. As for Madison, things got even more interesting. During her medical board certification exam, my old med school classmate, who happened to be her program director, flagged her exam for cheating. She had already failed it twice. This time, they didn't even release her score. They immediately opened an academic integrity investigation. Without passing her boards, she couldn't practice medicine, let alone secure an attending position. Simon thought he had found a young, beautiful trophy, but he didn't realize she lacked even the most basic professional qualifications. That was his karma. 3 days later, Simon ambushed me outside the wrought iron gates of my Beacon Hill home. His white coat was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in 72 hours. When he saw me, he lunged forward. His knees buckled, and he almost fell to the pavement. Ellie, I'm begging you, he croaked, his voice unrecognizable. Take the files back. Tell them they're fake. The disciplinary committee is meeting to decide my fate. My career is over. I have nothing left. I leaned against the brick pillar of my gate and looked at him. This was the man who had told me, Madison is pregnant, I have to take responsibility. Now he was practically on his knees like a beaten dog. Simon, you still have the estate. $5 million is enough for the rest of your life, right? His face twitched. By the way, I continued, I forgot to mention something. When your father bought that Weston property, he took out a commercial loan using his company's stock as collateral. And the primary creditor of that holding company? That's me. Simon's eyes bulged. What did you say? The trust my mother left me was more than enough to buy out your father's entire debt portfolio. Simon, you thought you were giving me a free mansion. You gave me a heavily mortgaged house with an outstanding balloon payment. His lips trembled. I leaned in, looking him dead in the eye, and enunciated clearly. 3 days ago, when you forced me to sign those divorce papers, you probably felt like a king. You thought giving me that house was the ultimate act of nobility. Listen to me, Simon. You are about to lose your job, your home, your reputation, and the woman carrying your child because the mother of your child can't even pass her medical boards. She won't even be able to feed herself. Simon collapsed onto the cobblestones. I stepped through the gate and locked it behind me. From outside, I could hear his agonizing, guttural sobs. I leaned against the heavy iron, looked up at the crisp Boston sky, and exhaled deeply. Eleanor, you did the right thing. And this is only the beginning. Madison thought she had won. In Simon's rented luxury apartment in the Seaport district, she was busy packing her bags, stuffing all of Simon's expensive designer clothes into her suitcase. As she packed, she was loudly talking on the phone with her best friend, practically shouting so the whole hallway could hear. I'm telling you, Simon gave me the estate. That huge mansion out in Weston. It's worth like $5 million. Her friend sounded skeptical on the other end. Really? Didn't he say he was giving it to his ex-wife? Madison scoffed. His ex-wife? That was just for show. Simon said. As soon as the divorce is finalized, he's putting the deed in my name. That old hag? He just let her stay there for a few days so she could feel good about herself. Just as she said this, Simon walked through the door. He looked horrendous, with massive dark circles under his eyes. He didn't even take off his shoes. He just collapsed onto the sofa. Madison shimmied over to him and cooed. Simon, baby, when are we moving into the estate? I can't wait anymore. I've already picked out paint colors. We'll paint the master bedroom a soft blush pink and put a crystal chandelier in the foyer. Simon irritably waved her off. Shut up. Let me have some quiet. Madison pouted but didn't dare start a fight. She knew he was in a foul mood. The hospital's disciplinary committee was investigating those 2 botched surgeries, and that bastard Victor Zeller was adding fuel to the fire every single day, but she couldn't hold it in. What about the keys to the estate? Did your ex-wife give them back? Simon said nothing. You have the property deed, right? Madison pressed. We can just go to the county clerk's office and transfer the title without her permission. I asked around. The divorce agreement says it goes to her, but until she formally registers the transfer, you can revoke the gift. Simon sat up sharply and glared at her. You asked around? Who told you to do that? Madison shrank back, intimidated by his tone. I was just asking. Simon took a deep breath and stood up. Tomorrow, I'll take you to see the house. But don't get your hopes up. Eleanor isn't as simple as you think. Madison didn't understand what he meant, but hearing that they were going to see the house made her squeal with joy. The next morning, Madison purposely wore the Chanel jacket and did her makeup flawlessly. She even put on a diamond pendant Simon had given her. Even though the stone was a mere 0.3 carats, she thought it was enough to show off. Simon drove her out to the exclusive Weston neighborhood. The estate was massive. 3 stories, landscaped gardens, a heated pool. The facade was accented with limestone, and a row of old-growth sycamore trees lined the driveway. Madison stood in front of the wrought iron gates, her hands trembling with excitement. It's gorgeous, she shrieked. Simon, is this really going to be our home? Simon didn't answer. He just pressed the intercom button. The gate was opened by a middle-aged woman in a property management uniform, holding an iPad. Can I help you? She asked. I'm looking for Eleanor Sterling, Simon said. The woman checked her iPad and replied flatly, Miss Sterling does not reside here. This property is managed by our firm. Miss Sterling is the sole owner. No one enters without her explicit authorization. Madison flared up. What management firm? I'm with Dr. Simon Pierce. This house originally belonged to him. The woman glanced at her iPad again. According to county records and the divorce decree, this property belongs to Miss Eleanor Sterling. Do you have written authorization from her? Stomping her foot in frustration, Madison pulled out her phone to call Eleanor. But after scrolling through her contacts, she realized she didn't even have her number. Simon's face was as dark as a thundercloud. He pulled out his own phone and dialed Eleanor. It rang 6 times with no answer. On the 7th ring, he was sent to voicemail. He tried again. The number you have reached is unavailable. Madison panicked. Is she refusing to give it to us? You said this house was definitely going to be ours. Simon gritted his teeth. When did I say that? I said the house went to her. But when my dad bought it, he took out a massive loan. If she wants to sell it, she has to pay off the mortgage first. And she doesn't have that kind of cash. Madison's eyes darted around. So we can help her pay off the loan, and then she'll give us the house, right? Simon let out a cold, hollow laugh. You're going to pay it off? Do you know how much the balloon payment is? $1 million. What are you going to pay it with? Madison fell silent. As a surgical resident, she took home about $60,000 a year after taxes. That wouldn't even cover the interest. At that moment, a sleek black Mercedes G-Wagon slowly pulled up to the gates. The tinted window rolled down. Eleanor sat in the driver's seat, wearing dark sunglasses and a sharp black trench coat. She looked at the couple standing by the gates, the corners of her lips curling into a slight smirk. Simon, Madison, what are you doing outside my house? She asked. Madison rushed over to the car and banged on the window. Eleanor, don't celebrate yet. This house originally belonged to Simon. What right do you have to steal it? Eleanor took off her sunglasses and looked at her. Madison withered slightly under her gaze, but still blurted out. The divorce agreement says it's yours, but you haven't transferred the deed yet. It's still marital property. I've already consulted a lawyer. If Simon revokes it, you get nothing. Eleanor let out a soft laugh. She opened the door, stepped out of the SUV, and stood face to face with Madison. Eleanor was half a head taller, and her mere presence instantly deflated Madison's bravado. Madison, what kind of strip mall lawyer did you consult? Because your lawyer clearly failed to tell you one crucial detail. Simon Pierce's name is not on the deed to this house. Madison froze. What? Eleanor pulled a thick manila envelope from her designer tote, pulled out the official property deed, and held it up to Madison's face. Under the grantee section, 3 words were clearly printed. Eleanor Sterling, sole owner. The date was from 5 years ago, 2 months after she and Simon got married. Simon's face lost all its color. He snatched the document and flipped it over 3 times. His voice shook. This is impossible. My father bought this house. How can it be in your name? Eleanor snatched the deed back and slipped it into her bag. Because 5 years ago, when your father's medical supply company was drowning in debt, you begged me to use my mother's trust fund to bail your family out. In exchange, the title of this house was transferred to me as collateral. Simon, you didn't forget, did you? That $1 million came from me. Simon's lips trembled. He hadn't forgotten. Of course he hadn't. 5 years ago, he had been on his knees begging Eleanor for help. Eleanor, without making a fuss, wired $1 million from her inheritance to save Pierce Medical Solutions. Back then, he swore he would treat her like a queen for the rest of his life. And what was he doing now? Bringing his mistress to gawk at the house. Madison looked at Simon in utter disbelief. You lied to me. You kept saying the house was yours, but it belonged to your ex-wife all along? Simon couldn't utter a single word. Eleanor looked at Madison and said calmly, Let me give you a piece of advice, little girl. A man who can betray me can easily betray you. You think you won the prize? You're just the next victim. With that, she walked through the pedestrian gate and slammed it shut with a loud metallic clang. Madison stood outside the gates, shaking with rage. She turned and glared at Simon, tears welling in her eyes. Simon, you are a piece of trash. You lied about the house. You lied about marrying me. You lied about giving me a perfect life. You don't even have a place to live. Simon irritably loosened his tie. Stop it. I'll figure something out. Figure what out? What can you possibly figure out? You're under investigation at the hospital. Your ex-wife leaked all your malpractice files. You think you're still going to be chief of surgery? Keep dreaming. Simon's face contorted with fury, and he suddenly shoved Madison hard by the shoulders. Shut your mouth! Madison stumbled back, clutching her chest, staring at him in shock. The man who had whispered sweet nothings to her and promised to take responsibility was now getting physical in the middle of the street. She burst into tears and ran down the road. Simon remained rooted to the spot, staring at the locked iron gates and the gleaming brass plaque that read, Sterling Residence. Suddenly, he realized that for the past 5 years, his entire life had been nothing but a pathetic joke. Dr. Victor Zeller was a ruthless man. He had been at Boston Metropolitan for 12 years. His surgical skills were just as good as Simon's, but because he didn't know how to churn out research papers or network with the right people, Simon had constantly overshadowed him. Every year during evaluations, Simon would present groundbreaking research published in top-tier medical journals, while Victor could only stand in the background and grind his teeth. He knew Simon didn't write those papers. Everyone in the department knew, But no one dared speak up because Simon's former father-in-law Eleanor's father was a heavy hitter on the state medical board. But now that Eleanor had divorced him, that umbrella of protection was gone. Victor knew his time had come. The original patient charts Eleanor had given him via proxy detailed Simon's gross negligence. In one, he severed a bile duct and lied about it. In the other, a patient almost bled out post-op. Simon had paid one patient $200,000 for their silence and transferred the other to a different hospital while doctoring the records. But Eleanor had been his wife and an attending at the same hospital. She had backdoor access to the original electronic health records before they were scrubbed. Victor didn't hand the files over immediately. He waited for the perfect moment, waited until Eleanor formally resigned, until Simon thought the difference settled on his divorce. Only then did he drop the bomb on the disciplinary committee. On Monday morning, the hospital held a mandatory M&M staff meeting. Simon sat among the surgeons, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hadn't slept a wink. Madison had run off. Eleanor wasn't answering her phone. His father's company was in freefall because a mystery creditor had demanded the immediate repayment of a $3 million loan. He had no idea the creditor was Eleanor. At the podium, Dr. Harrison, the chief of staff, summarized the hospital's quarterly metrics before shifting his tone. Recently, we received severe formal complaints regarding the professional conduct of a senior surgeon in our department. Hospital administration is taking this with the utmost seriousness and has convened a formal disciplinary committee. Pending the investigation, the physician in question is suspended from all clinical duties, surgeries, and patient contact. A dead silence fell over the auditorium. Everyone knew exactly who Harrison was talking about. Simon's face drained of color. Victor Zeller stood up. His voice was calm but easily carried across the room. Dr. Harrison, a suggestion. Since we are conducting an investigation, it should be fully transparent. I propose we distribute copies of the patient charts in question to all department heads, so we can review them as an M&M case study. It will prevent rumors that administration is covering for anyone. Simon whipped around and glared at Victor. Victor met his gaze with a faint, chilling smile. Dr. Harrison thought for a moment and nodded. Agreed. Medical records will redact the patient names and distribute the files to the department chairs. Simon's hands began to shake violently. He knew what those charts meant. If they went public within the medical community, his career was dead. In this field, reputation is everything. Without it, no patient would let him near them with a scalpel, and no hospital would touch him for liability reasons. After the meeting, Simon stormed into Victor's office. He grabbed Victor by the lapels of his white coat, his eyes bloodshot. You did this? You leaked those files? Victor, are you trying to destroy me? Victor didn't fight back, he just smirked. Simon, look in the mirror. I'm not destroying you. You destroyed yourself. You butchered those patients. You forged the charts. I'm just showing the committee the truth. Simon raised his fist, ready to swing, but he froze. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor. He had no idea when she had returned to the hospital. She stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with an impassive expression. Simon let go of Victor and stumbled toward Eleanor. His voice broke into a desperate sob. Ellie! Why are you doing this? We were husband and wife. Why are you trying to ruin me? Eleanor looked at him, her eyes as calm as a frozen lake. Simon, I'm ruining you? When you were screwing that resident in our bed, did you remember we were husband and wife? When you got her pregnant, did you remember we were husband and wife? When you threw the keys to that house at me like I was a beggar, did you remember we were husband and wife? Simon choked on his words. Besides, Eleanor continued, I only provided the truth. The truth was always there. I didn't invent those botched surgeries. You think this is unfair? You feel victimized? Did you ever stop to think about the 2 patients you permanently maimed? They couldn't even sue you because you falsified their medical records. Tears finally spilled from Simon's eyes. He dropped to his knees right there in the hospital corridor, grabbing the hem of Eleanor's tailored slacks. Ellie, I'm begging you, he sobbed loudly. Go to the chief of staff. Tell him the files are fake. Tell him you forged them because you were a bitter ex-wife. Take the blame for me. Please, I'll do anything. Eleanor looked down at him. This man, groveling on the linoleum floor, was the man she had shared a bed with for 5 years. She used to think he was her entire world. She had written his papers, crunched his data, pushed him through his evaluations. She had given him the best years of her life, and now he was begging her to commit a felony to save his skin. She bent down and peeled his fingers off her clothes. Simon, she said softly, do you know why I put up with you for 5 years? Because right before my mother died, she told me, find the man you love and accept him with all his flaws. I took that to heart. I accepted your selfishness, your greed, and your breathtaking hypocrisy. She paused and stood up straight. But my mother's advice doesn't apply anymore. Because you are absolutely worthless. She turned on her heel and walked away. Doctors and nurses had gathered in the corridor, watching the spectacle in stunned silence. Someone discreetly snapped a photo of Simon on his knees and dropped it into the hospital's WhatsApp group. Within 3 minutes, it had spread across the entire staff. Within 10, it was circulating among medical professionals all over New England. That afternoon, Simon received his formal notice from HR. Indefinite suspension without pay. Pending review for termination and revocation of medical license. He sat in his empty office. His phone blew up with texts from colleagues, old med school buddies, and acquaintances. Some asked, "Heard what happened? Is it true?" Others sent screenshots of the leaked charts. "Man, these records look really bad." Most simply blocked his number. Madison saw the photo too. She was packing the last of her things in the rented apartment, preparing to move back home. Seeing Simon groveling like a dog, she froze, then threw her phone onto the bed. She didn't care about him anymore. Her only concern was her medical board exam. Her results from the retake had finally arrived, stamped with a massive red warning, flagged for academic review. She had called the testing center, and they coldly informed her that her exam pattern showed statistical anomalies consistent with severe cheating. Madison didn't understand how she'd been caught. Sure, she had copied a few answers from the girl sitting next to her, but was it really that obvious? What she didn't know was that her seating arrangement had been specifically orchestrated by the test proctor Eleanor's old med school buddy. And the girl she copied from was an undercover testing official who had intentionally filled in a highly specific pattern of incorrect answers designed to trap cheaters. By copying the decoy test to get a perfect score, Madison had generated a completely impossible answer sheet. She would never be a licensed doctor in the United States. Madison was spiraling into a full-blown panic. She called the medical certification board 20 times, only to be given the same robotic answer. "Your results are under investigation. Please hold." She couldn't hold. She had applied for residency fellowships at 3 different hospitals, and all of them required passing board scores. Without them, she couldn't even get an interview. She called Simon, hoping he could use his connections, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He was too busy scrambling for a malpractice defense attorney. Pacing the apartment like a caged animal, Madison dug up a number Simon had given her months ago, a prominent contact at the State Department of Public Health. She dialed it. After a long wait, a gruff voice answered. "Hello? Hi. Yes, good afternoon," Madison said in her sweetest voice. "I'm calling on behalf of Dr. Simon Pierce. I was hoping to get some guidance regarding a board certification issue." "Dr. Pierce?" the voice interrupted sharply. "Who is this?" "I'm his girlfriend," Madison replied. There were a few seconds of heavy silence. "Dr. Pierce is currently under state investigation for gross negligence. I highly advise you to distance yourself from him. I cannot help you with your boards. Wait for the mail." Click. Madison gripped her phone, trembling with rage. She hated Simon for being so useless. But she hated Eleanor even more. She hated how Eleanor hovered over her life like a vengeful ghost. She had no idea just how deep Eleanor's reach went. Later that day, Madison's phone rang with an unknown number. "Madison Bell? This is Linda Prescott, Chief Medical Officer at Horizon Women's Clinic. I understand you're looking for a fellowship placement." Madison's heart leaped. Horizon was the most prestigious private clinic in Boston. Getting in there was a golden ticket. Yes, Dr. Prescott. I would love to join your team. I reviewed your CV, the CMO said smoothly. Everything looks adequate. But you don't have your board certification yet, correct? I just took the exam, Madison lied hurriedly. The results will be out any day. I'm positive I passed. Linda Prescott let out a dry chuckle. Madison, I'll be blunt. I have a very close friend, your med school advisor, Dr. Zimmerman. He asked me to pass along a message. Madison's stomach plummeted. What message? He said that when you were doing your rotations, you constantly showed up late, left early, fabricated patient vitals, and played on your phone in the OR. He was going to turn a blind eye and pass you, but someone asked him to reevaluate his professional ethics. Madison's lips trembled. Who? Who asked him? That's not your concern. Just remember this. You are never getting that medical license. Don't waste your time. Find a new career. Click. Madison collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Zimmerman, the sweet old advisor who always praised her, who she thought adored her, had destroyed her future with one phone call. And the person who had made Dr. Zimmerman change his mind? Madison didn't even have to guess. She snatched her phone and frantically scrolled to Eleanor's number. She had secretly copied it from Simon's phone weeks ago but never dared to call. Now she had nothing left to lose. The line connected. "Eleanor! What the hell do you want?" Madison screamed into the receiver. "I stole your husband. Get your revenge on him. Why are you destroying my life? I didn't do anything to you." There were 2 seconds of silence before Eleanor's cool, measured voice came through. "Madison, you have it backward. I'm not destroying you. You destroyed yourself." "Bullshit. You forced Dr. Zimmerman to blacklist me. You think I don't know you have connections?" Eleanor laughed softly. "Dr. Zimmerman was my classmate at Harvard Med. We survived residency together. I helped him publish his first major thesis, and he owes me his career." Madison was dumbstruck. Classmate? Dr. Zimmerman was in his 50s, and Eleanor was only 32. How could they be classmates? What Madison didn't know was that Eleanor was a prodigy. She started undergrad at 16, finished med school early, and was practically Zimmerman's peer during his delayed residency. "Madison," Eleanor continued, "did you really think cheating on your medical boards would go unnoticed? The girl sitting next to you had a decoy test booklet. You copied 8 complex diagnostic questions, and every single one was wrong because she intentionally filled out the fail-safes. You submitted a perfect answer sheet that completely contradicted your test version. Do you know what they call that? Indisputable evidence of academic fraud." Madison's head spun. She remembered the slightly chubby girl coughing next to her during the exam. She had copied off her because the girl looked like a nerd. It turned out she was a plant from the testing center. Madison broke down. "Eleanor, please, I'm begging you. Let me go," she sobbed. "What happened with Simon was my fault. I shouldn't have slept with him. I'll leave. I'll break up with him. Please just let me have my career." Eleanor paused. "You're leaving him? You think you still have leverage? You've already destroyed Simon, and you've destroyed yourself. I didn't force you to cheat. That was your choice." "What do you want?" Madison wailed. "Money? The house? I'll give it all back. I'll give you Simon back. Keep him. I don't want trash back in my house. But you might want to ask yourself if you still want him." The line went dead. Madison sat paralyzed for 10 minutes. Suddenly, she remembered her ace in the hole, her stomach. She rubbed her slightly rounding belly. She was 3 months pregnant. This baby was her golden ticket. Simon desperately wanted a child. The Pierce family was wealthy, and they had been demanding a grandson for years. When Eleanor couldn't get pregnant for 5 years, Simon's mother, Margaret, had constantly berated her as a barren hen. Now, if Madison gave them a son, the Pierces would never abandon her. Hope reignited in her chest. She grabbed her phone and texted Simon. "Simon, I'm sorry. I won't fight with you anymore. I have your baby inside me, and I can't give up on us. Let's just be a family, okay? I don't care about the house or the money. I just want you." She hit send. No reply. She waited 30 minutes and sent another. "Where are you?" Still nothing. She called. It went straight to voicemail. Her heart sank. What Madison didn't know was that at that exact moment, Simon was sitting in his lawyer's office, desperately trying to figure out how to legally prove the baby wasn't his. Because the baby, in fact, belonged to someone else entirely. Simon had never experienced such profound humiliation in his life. The disciplinary committee had raided the surgical department, confiscating his patient logs from the last 3 years. Dr. Victor Zeller stood in front of the entire surgical staff, projecting the forged patient charts onto a massive screen, tearing them apart line by line. "Look here," Victor pointed with a laser pointer. "The timeline in the surgical notes doesn't align with the pharmacy dispensing records. The patient began hemorrhaging at 5:10 p.m., but the chart says 6 p.m. Where was Dr. Pierce for those 50 minutes? The conference room was dead silent. Simon sat with his head bowed, his fingernails digging into his palms until they bled. "And look at this," Victor continued. "The patient's signature on this informed consent form is drastically different from their intake paperwork. I strongly suspect this consent form was forged and backdated after the botched surgery." Simon couldn't take it anymore. He jumped up. "Victor, that's enough. You're a general surgeon. What right do you have to audit my specialized procedures?" "I don't have the right," Victor replied coolly. "But the state medical board does. I'm simply acting as their proxy to prepare the review." "Relax, Dr. Pierce." The head of the ethics board tapped his microphone. "Dr. Pierce, sit down. If you feel Dr. Zeller's presence is inappropriate, you are welcome to leave the room." Simon gritted his teeth and sat. He knew Victor wasn't going anywhere. The entire hospital was reveling in his downfall, and Victor was just the master of ceremonies. The investigation dragged on for 3 days. Simon lost 10 pounds. Gray hairs sprouted at his temples. His defense attorney told him the brutal truth. If the board found him guilty of gross negligence and chart tampering, he wouldn't just be fired, he'd face criminal charges, lose his medical license permanently, and face massive civil lawsuits from the maimed patients. The damages will easily exceed $2 million, the lawyer warned him. Simon's brain was misfiring. At the same time, his father's company, Pierce Medical Solutions, was imploding. The mysterious creditor was demanding the immediate repayment of a $3 million commercial loan. His father, Peter, had suffered a mild heart attack from the stress and was hospitalized. His mother called him incessantly, sobbing, begging him to fix it. But how could he? His savings were already drained by the lawyer's retainer. He couldn't even afford next month's rent on his luxury apartment. Madison kept spamming his phone with texts. "Where are you? Are you abandoning me?" He found her so repulsive that he simply blocked her number. On Monday morning, Simon did the unthinkable. He drove to Eleanor's historic Beacon Hill townhouse and dropped to his knees. Not on one knee, on both knees, pressing his forehead against the cold cobblestone sidewalk. The townhouse was on a quiet, affluent street, but there was still foot traffic. Dog walkers, couriers, wealthy old ladies. Every single person who walked past stopped, stared, and pulled out their phones to record him. Simon didn't care. His reputation was already ash. It couldn't get any worse. He knelt there for an hour before the heavy mahogany door swung open. Eleanor stood in the doorway in chic loungewear, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. She looked down at him without surprise, without pity, and without an ounce of disgust. "Been waiting long?" she asked calmly. Simon looked up, his eyes bloodshot and swollen. "Ellie, I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Please take me back. Let's get remarried. Please." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee and said nothing. Simon crawled closer on his knees, trying to grab her ankle, but she took a step back. "Ellie, I know I failed you. What happened with Madison? It was a lapse in judgment. Temporary insanity. I swear I'll never look at another woman again. Please forgive me." "Simon, are you kneeling here because you love me?" Eleanor asked. Simon froze for a second, then nodded frantically. "Of course I love you. I've always loved you. Madison was just a mistake. Stop insulting my intelligence," Eleanor cut him off. "You don't love me. You love my ghostwritten research papers, my surgical connections, my family's influence, and my money. You didn't lose me. You lost the entire foundation your fake life was built on." Tears streamed down Simon's face. "That's not true." Eleanor crouched down to meet his eye level. "Simon, let me tell you 3 things. First, the creditor destroying your father's company? That's me. That $3 million loan was issued by my family's private equity firm, and I am recalling the debt in full within 90 days. Simon's face turned gray. "Second," Eleanor continued smoothly, "I gave the original patient charts to Victor Zeller, but my lawyer has heavily encrypted backup copies. If you don't want those files handed directly to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges, you will cooperate fully with the medical board." Simon's lips quivered uncontrollably. "And third," Eleanor stood up, towering over him. "This is the most important one. The baby in Madison's stomach isn't yours." Simon snapped his head up. "What did you say?" Eleanor smiled. It was a beautiful smile, devoid of any warmth. "You really didn't know? Before you, Madison was sleeping with Dr. Ian Kendall from orthopedics. Ian is married to Lucille Kendall, the VP of hospital administration. When Madison got pregnant, Ian dumped her to save his own skin. So, she panicked and found a suitable fall guy. You." Simon's mind short-circuited. Dr. Ian Kendall, the balding, overweight orthopedic attending who was 10 years older than him. "You're lying!" Simon screamed. "Madison isn't like that." Eleanor pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and tossed it at him. "This is the ultrasound report from 3 months ago. Look at the gestational age. 7 weeks. 3 months ago, you and Madison hadn't even hooked up yet. You two only started sleeping together 2 months ago. Do the math, Simon. That baby cannot physically be yours." Simon picked up the ultrasound printout with trembling hands. 7 weeks, 3 months ago. Back then, he and Madison were just passing colleagues. He remembered the day Madison confessed her love to him. She had acted so innocent, so pure, claiming she had harbored a secret crush on his surgical brilliance for years. In reality, she had been knocked up by an ugly married doctor and was just desperately looking for a rich idiot to pin the child on. A wave of intense nausea hit Simon. He crawled over to the gutter and violently threw up. Eleanor stood in her doorway watching him heave. Pedestrians had stopped to film the spectacle. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. and someone whispered, "Serves the cheating bastard right." Eleanor turned, walked inside, and shut the heavy oak door. She leaned against it and let out a long breath. Outside, Simon's wailing grew louder and more pathetic. Finally, she thought, this garbage of a man finally understands what karma feels like. Simon's mother, Margaret Pierce, was a domineering woman. She had worked as a head nurse at a VA hospital for 20 years, seen it all, and developed a cynical, social climbing view of life. When Eleanor first married into the family, Margaret treated her like royalty because Eleanor's father was a major political player in the state healthcare system. But when Eleanor's father passed away, Margaret's attitude flipped. "Ellie, dear, have some more wine," turned into Eleanor. "Why are you working such late shifts? And after 5 years of marriage without a baby, are you barren? Is there something defective with your uterus?" Eleanor had endured it all because Simon always played the peacekeeper in front of her. She didn't know that behind her back, Simon told his mother, "Mom, I'd divorce her in a heartbeat, but her dad's old connections are still useful." Now that the divorce was finalized, Margaret was over the moon. She called all their extended family and organized a massive celebration dinner at an upscale seafood restaurant in Boston's Seaport District. She booked a private banquet room to celebrate her son's liberation from slavery. She had no idea her son was currently drowning. On Saturday night, the entire Pierce clan gathered at the restaurant. Margaret wore a flashy crimson dress, heavy makeup, and a smug smile. She sat at the head of the table, beaming. Simon sat next to her. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken, looking as if he had aged a decade in a week. He stared blankly at his phone, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His aunt leaned over and grinned. "Simon, I hear you found a gorgeous young thing. When are you bringing her around to meet the family?" Simon's jaw twitched. He said nothing. Margaret answered for him. "Soon, soon. Madison is such a sweet girl. I've met her. A brilliant surgical resident, stunningly beautiful. And best of all, she's pregnant. The Pierce family is finally getting a grandson." The relatives cheered and raised their glasses. The room was loud and festive. Simon's father, Peter, sat on the other side, frowning deeply. He was a decent, albeit weak man who ran Pierce Medical Solutions, a company that had only survived the last few years thanks to Eleanor's financial injections. "Did you finalize the divorce cleanly?" Peter asked his son quietly. "Is Eleanor going to cause trouble?" "Don't mention her name," Simon snapped. Peter sighed and fell silent. The waiters brought out massive seafood towers, oysters, sea scallops, Maine lobster. Margaret clinked her fork against her champagne flute. "Everyone, raise your glasses. Let's toast to my son's beautiful new life." Before anyone could drink, the heavy mahogany doors to the private dining room swung open. Eleanor stood in the doorway. She wore a floor-length emerald velvet gown, her hair swept up into an elegant French twist, a single strand of South Sea pearls resting against her collarbone. The light makeup highlighted her sharp, aristocratic beauty. Standing right behind her was a middle-aged man in a sharp-tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase. Margaret's smile froze. Eleanor stepped into the room and smiled warmly. "Margaret, hello. I heard you were having a little family get-together. I was just having dinner in the main dining room, so I thought I'd pop in to propose a toast." Margaret's face mottled with rage. "Who invited you? You are not welcome here." Eleanor ignored her completely and turned her attention to Peter. She picked up a bottle of expensive Bordeaux from the table, poured herself a glass, and walked over to him. "Peter, I'd like to toast you. Thank you for tolerating me these past 5 years." Peter stood up awkwardly and clinked his glass against hers. Eleanor drank the wine, set the glass down, and addressed the bewildered room of relatives. "Honored guests, I didn't just come here for the wine. I have a brief announcement to make." She reached back, took a thick legal folio from the man behind her, and held it up. "This is Mr. Vance, my corporate attorney, and this is a transfer of ownership agreement for Peter Pierce's company, Pierce Medical Solutions. My private equity firm has officially acquired a 51% controlling stake in the company." A dead silence fell over the banquet room. Peter's face turned ashen. "What did you say? Your equity firm?" "Yes, Peter," Eleanor said smoothly. "The investment firm I inherited from my late mother. 3 years ago, when your company was facing bankruptcy, you took out a $3 million commercial loan from my firm. You signed an agreement using your majority shares as collateral. If you failed to repay the principal and interest on time, my firm had the right to seize the shares." She flipped open the folder. "The loan matured this past August. You failed to pay. Therefore, per the contract, my firm has executed the hostile takeover. I am now the majority owner and acting CEO of Pierce Medical Solutions." Peter's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate. "You're lying!" Margaret shrieked, her face turning purple. You tricked us. You stole our family business. Eleanor glanced at her with icy detachment. Margaret, your husband signed the contract of his own free will. The legal paperwork is ironclad. If you think there's been foul play, you are welcome to hire a lawyer and sue me. Trembling with fury, Margaret grabbed her champagne flute and lunged forward, aiming to smash it against Eleanor's face. Simon jumped up and caught his mother's wrist. Mom, stop. Don't do it. Eleanor looked at Simon and smiled. Simon, there's one more thing you should announce to your family. Why don't you tell them about Madison's baby? The room began to murmur. What about the baby? Is it not Simon's? Eleanor raised her voice so everyone could hear. 3 months ago, Madison was sleeping with Dr. Ian Kendall, a married attending at your hospital. When he dumped her, she found Simon. The baby she's carrying belongs to Ian Kendall. You can check the paternity yourselves. Simon slammed his hands on the table, the veins in his neck bulging. Eleanor, that is enough. Did you come here just to ruin everything? Yes. Eleanor looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. I came to collect my debts. Simon, you don't just owe me the $1 million for that house. You owe me for the 327 medical papers I ghost wrote to build your fraudulent career. And you owe me for the 5 years of my youth you squandered. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Eleanor turned and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the brass handle and looked back. By the way, Margaret, she said softly, you were just toasting to your son's new life. I think you're mistaken. He didn't lose a barren wife today. He lost the only pillar holding up his pathetic, parasitic existence. The door clicked shut. The banquet room felt like a morgue. Margaret collapsed into her chair, gasping for air. Peter buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as he wept silently. Simon stood frozen like a statue. Margaret, his aunt whispered nervously. The food. The food is getting cold. No one touched a bite. Suddenly, Simon bolted from the room. He chased Eleanor out of the restaurant, catching up to her in the valet line just as she was getting into her Mercedes. It was starting to rain. He grabbed her arm. Ellie! He screamed over the downpour. You can't do this to my father. That company is his life's work. Eleanor ripped her arm away from his grip. His life's work? What about mine, Simon? When you were cheating on me, did you care about my life's work? When you tried to throw me out of my own marriage with nothing, did you care that my mother's money kept your father afloat for 3 years? Simon had no answer. Eleanor got into the driver's seat and rolled down the window. Looking at Simon standing in the freezing Boston rain, she said, You think this is over? Not even close. The fallout from you and Madison is just getting started. Brace yourself. The Mercedes sped away, its taillights bleeding into the wet asphalt. Simon stood alone in the rain, his designer suit soaked to the bone. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an emergency news alert from the State Medical Board. Vice Chair of Surgery at Boston Metropolitan Hospital faces criminal indictment for gross negligence and chart forgery. License revoked pending hearing. Simon closed his eyes. The ground beneath him completely gave way. Madison was 4 months pregnant. Her stomach was visibly rounding, impossible to hide even under loose scrubs. She lived alone in her cramped rented apartment, eating cheap takeout. Simon wasn't answering her calls or texts. She had tried to ambush him at the hospital, but security had physically blocked her at the entrance, informing her she was permanently banned from the premises. She went to his luxury seaport apartment, only to find the locks changed. The concierge told her doctor, Pierce had been evicted 3 days ago. That was when Madison realized she had been totally abandoned. Not just by Simon, she never really cared about him anyway. She had been abandoned by everyone. The hospital fired her. The medical board permanently banned her for cheating. Dr. Zimmerman refused to speak to her. Even her own parents stopped taking her calls. Her mother had suffered a stress-induced panic attack and was hospitalized after finding out her daughter was pregnant out of wedlock and fired for fraud. Madison sat on the cheap laminate floor of her apartment, staring at her phone. Her best friend had just texted her. Maddie, I heard what happened. Don't be mad. But I can't help you. My boyfriend says you crossed some very powerful people in Boston. You need to leave the city. Go back home. Madison typed a single word. Okay. She threw the phone aside and rubbed her stomach. 4 months. If she didn't get an abortion now, she would be forced to carry it to term. But she didn't have the thousands of dollars required for a late-term procedure, and no reputable clinic in Boston wanted to touch her. Her name was toxic in the medical community. Suddenly, a dark, twisted idea formed in her mind. She would induce a miscarriage, but she wouldn't do it quietly. She would frame someone else. She would make the entire city believe Eleanor Sterling had assaulted her and killed her unborn child. Even if Eleanor didn't go to prison, The stigma of being a baby killer would destroy her medical career forever. Madison immediately set her plan in motion. She stalked Eleanor's routine and figured out she frequented an upscale coffee shop in Back Bay called the Sycamore Cafe. That Tuesday, Madison arrived at the Sycamore Cafe early and took a seat in a secluded corner booth. She ordered a glass of warm water and secretly slipped a vial of mifepristone, a potent abortion pill she had stolen from the hospital pharmacy months ago, into her pocket. She texted Eleanor, "I'm at the Sycamore. I want to talk to you about Simon. I have something you need to know. If you don't come, I'm going straight to the Boston Globe." Eleanor replied 2 minutes later, "I'll be there in 20. Madison's heart raced. Her plan was simple. When Eleanor arrived, Madison would provoke a loud argument. Then, she would fake being shoved by Eleanor, discreetly swallow the pills in the commotion, and collapse. When the paramedics arrived, she would scream that Eleanor had caused her miscarriage. She knew the cafe had security cameras, but she had specifically chosen a booth, located in a blind spot. It was foolproof. 20 minutes later, the door chimed, and Eleanor walked in. She wore a crisp white silk blouse and tailored trousers, looking effortlessly powerful. Spotting Madison, she walked straight over and sat down. "Speak," Eleanor commanded, her voice icy. Madison forced a pathetic smile. "Dr. Sterling, I don't want to fight with you anymore. I know I made a mistake. I'm leaving Simon, and I'm leaving Boston. Can you please just forgive me?" Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Madison, what's in your pocket?" Madison's heart skipped a beat. She instinctively covered her jacket pocket. "Mifepristone," Eleanor stated matter-of-factly. "An abortifacient. You're planning to swallow it right in front of me and then scream to the police that I assaulted you. Isn't that right?" Madison's face turned the color of chalk. "How? How do you know that?" Eleanor leaned back and crossed her arms. "Madison, before you came here, did you forget to turn off the security camera in your apartment? The landlord installed a hidden feed in your living room months ago." Madison's brain short-circuited. "Camera?" Eleanor pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and slid it across the table. On the screen was high-definition video footage of Madison sitting on her bed, holding the vial of pills, muttering to herself, "When I take this, I'll say Eleanor pushed me. Let's see that bitch wiggle her way out of a murder charge." Madison's hands shook violently. She lunged across the table to snatch the phone, but Eleanor swiftly pulled it back. "You have no moves left, Madison," Eleanor said coldly. "This video is already in the hands of my lawyer and the Boston Police Department. If you try to frame me, this becomes premeditated criminal conspiracy. Under state law, faking an assault to induce a miscarriage and framing a physician, you'll be looking at federal prison." Tears burst from Madison's eyes. She slid out of the booth, dropping to her knees on the cafe floor, grabbing Eleanor's hand. "Dr. Sterling, please, I'm begging you, don't call the police. I was just scared. I know I shouldn't have done it. Please let me go. My baby can't go to prison with me." Eleanor looked down at her, her expression entirely devoid of pity. "5 minutes ago, you were planning to destroy my life and frame me for murder. Now you're begging for mercy. Do you honestly think I'm going to forgive you?" "I'm a monster," Madison wailed, drawing stares from the baristas. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but my baby is innocent. You can't make an unborn child pay for my sins." Eleanor yanked her hand away and stood up. "Get off the floor. I'm not pressing charges today. Not because I forgive you, but because you aren't worth the legal paperwork." She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a folded document, and dropped it onto the table. "This is the DNA paternity test for Dr. Ian Kendall. The baby is his. I took the liberty of FedExing a certified copy to his wife, Lucille Kendall." Madison stopped crying instantly, her blood running cold. Lucille Kendall, the vice president of hospital administration. She was known as the most terrifying, ruthless executive in the Boston medical network. Lucille had heard rumors of her husband's infidelity for years but lacked the proof. Now that she had a certified DNA test in her hands, Ian Kendall's life was over. And Madison's would be a living hell. Eleanor turned and walked toward the exit. She paused at the door, not looking back. "Madison, you better pack your bags tonight. There isn't a single square inch of Boston left for you." The cafe door chimed shut. Madison collapsed onto the floor in a heap. What Madison didn't know was that Eleanor had bluffed about one detail. The video wasn't from a landlord's hidden camera. The previous tenants in Madison's apartment had been running a wire fraud scam, and the FBI had bugged the place. Eleanor's private investigator had simply bribed a contact to secure the leaked feed. Sometimes coincidences in this world are far more terrifying than any conspiracy. The hospital's investigation finally concluded. Dr. Simon Pierce was found guilty on 2 counts of gross medical negligence and systematic chart forgery. The punishment was absolute: immediate termination, permanent revocation of his Massachusetts medical license, and a mandated civil payout of $1.2 million to the two maimed patients, plus an $800,000 fine to the hospital for liability damages. He didn't have a dime of it. His father's company was now controlled by Eleanor, and his father's remaining assets were frozen. His mother's nursing pension barely covered her own groceries. Desperate, Simon sold everything he owned, his Porsche, his Rolexes, and even the Chanel jacket Madison had left behind, which he hawked on eBay for a measly $2,000. He managed to scrape together $500,000, but it wasn't nearly enough to keep him out of jail. In the end, his father, Peter, was forced to sell their beloved family home in the suburbs to cover the rest of the restitution. On a rainy Monday, Simon stood outside the gates of Boston Metropolitan Hospital, the place he had worked for a decade. The security guard stepped in front of him. "Dr. Pierce, you are not permitted on the premises. Your badge has been deactivated." Simon opened his mouth to argue. He wanted to shout, "I'm the vice chair of surgery," but he stayed silent. He wasn't a doctor anymore. He was a convicted felon. The sliding glass doors opened, and Dr. Victor Zeller walked out, wearing a crisp, tailored white coat with a shiny new badge, Chief of General Surgery. Victor glanced at Simon, gave a curt nod, and walked toward the reserved parking garage without saying a word. Simon stood in the rain, watching him go. The man he had suppressed for 12 years was now a king, and Simon was nothing. His phone buzzed. It was his mother, Margaret. "Simon, get to Mass Gen right now," she sobbed hysterically. "Your father had a massive coronary. He's in the ICU." Simon sprinted to the hospital, not his old one, but Massachusetts General. Peter Pierce lay in the ICU, hooked up to a ventilator, the EKG monitor beeping ominously. Margaret sat beside the bed, weeping uncontrollably. "His company is gone. Our house is sold. He has nothing left," she cried. "That ex-wife of yours is the devil incarnate." Simon stood at the foot of the bed, staring at his unconscious father. Suddenly, Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "You didn't just lose me." She was right. He had lost his career, his wealth, his reputation, and his father's legacy. He had lost everything. And it was entirely his own fault. If he hadn't cheated, if he had just been a decent husband, if he hadn't been so consumed by greed. But life doesn't give refunds on regrets. The next morning, Simon went to Eleanor's Beacon Hill townhouse one last time. He didn't kneel. He just stood at the heavy oak door and rang the bell. 10 minutes later, Eleanor opened it. "You're back?" she asked, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Ellie, I'm not asking you to take me back," Simon said hollowly. "I'm only asking for one thing. Spare my father's company. It's his life's work. His heart is failing. If he wakes up and realizes it's gone, it will kill him." Eleanor looked at him in silence for a long moment. "Simon, do you know why your father's company survived this long? Because 3 years ago, I took $3 million of my mother's money and bailed your family out." Simon looked down at his shoes. "Your father used my money to buy new manufacturing equipment and expand production," Eleanor continued. "He promised to pay me back in 3 years with interest, using his equity as collateral. It's been 3 years, and he hasn't even paid the minimum interest. Do you really think I owe him mercy?" Simon couldn't speak. Eleanor crossed her arms. "Let's do the math. Your father owes me $3 million in principal, plus interest, totaling almost $4 million. That Weston estate I used to pay off your first debt, I sold it for $5 million. After clearing the mortgage and the taxes, it barely covers what your family stole from me. You are still legally in my debt." Simon's voice broke. "You want my father to pay you back? Where is he going to get the money?" "That is his problem, not mine." Simon suddenly dropped to his knees, slamming his forehead against the stone steps. "Ellie, I'm begging you. I'll bash my head against the pavement until I bleed. Spare my father. Give him his company back. I'll be your slave for the rest of my life." "Fine." Eleanor looked down at him. This arrogant surgeon, who once told her he had to take responsibility for his mistress, was now bleeding on her doorstep. "Simon, do you remember the day we divorced?" Eleanor asked. Simon froze. "You threw the keys on the table and said, 'That's enough for the rest of your life.'" Eleanor mocked his pompous tone perfectly. "Do you know what I was thinking in that exact moment?" Simon shook his head slowly. "I was thinking, what a pathetic little man. He thinks a mortgaged house is a treasure. He thinks he can buy a woman's silence with debt. He had no idea that the woman sitting across from him held the detonator to his entire existence in her pocket." Eleanor crouched down to meet his eyes. "Simon, do you know why I stayed married to you for 5 years? I was waiting for you to make one fatal mistake so I could trap you in my net." Simon's pupils dilated in horror. You planned this all along?" "I didn't plan it. I protected myself," Eleanor corrected, standing up and smiling. "I knew about you and Madison months ago. I knew you forged those patient charts the day you did it. I knew the exact financial ruin your father's company was in. I just sat back and waited for you both to hang yourselves." Simon collapsed onto the steps, the last ounce of fight leaving his body like air from a punctured tire. Eleanor stepped back inside and began to close the door. "Simon, the divorce decree says you walk away with nothing. The Weston house was mine, and the debt you owe me, you'll spend the rest of your life paying it off. As for the company, I'm hiring a new CEO. Your father can stay on as an unpaid consultant, but he will never own a single share again." The heavy oak door slammed shut. Simon remained on his knees. The pale morning sun beat down on him. His phone rang. It was Madison. He hesitated, then answered. "Simon!" Madison shrieked, her voice frantic. "Lucille Kendall came to my apartment. She's suing me for alienation of affection and emotional distress. She said she's going to hire people to break my legs. Simon, please save me." Simon closed his eyes. "Madison," he said hoarsely, "the baby isn't mine." There was a 3-second silence on the other end, followed by Madison's hysterical screaming. "You found out? How did you find out?" "Simon, listen to me. I can explain. Ian tricked me, I swear." Simon hung up. He threw his phone against the brick wall, shattering the screen into a million pieces. He knelt on Eleanor's doorstep for the rest of the day. By evening, it started to rain again, soaking him to the bone. Pedestrians recognized him, pointing and whispering. "That's the butcher surgeon. I heard he forged charts. Serves him right." Simon listened to their whispers and didn't argue, because he knew they were right. Madison's legal father was a man named Michael Bell. Eleanor had never met this man, but she knew the name. When her mother, Anne Sterling, was still alive, she occasionally mentioned him. Michael Bell had been a business partner of Eleanor's father in the medical supply industry. They had a massive falling out, and Michael moved out of state, never to return. Before Anne passed away, she held Eleanor's hand and whispered, "Ellie, remember this. If a man named Michael Bell ever comes into your life, do not trust him. He is a wicked man." Eleanor had always remembered that warning, but she never expected Michael Bell to crash into her life like this. It was a Friday. Eleanor was sorting through her late mother's belongings in the attic of the Beacon Hill townhouse. She opened an old cedar trunk filled with photographs and letters. A loose envelope fluttered to the floor. The return address read, Michael Bell. Hesitantly, Eleanor opened the letter. It was short. "Anne, forgive me. I know I was wrong. But what's done is done. Madison is an innocent child. She knows nothing. I beg you, for the sake of what we once shared, don't tell her anything. I will raise her as my own, and I won't let her interfere with your life." Eleanor's hands began to shake. Madison Bell. She read the letter 3 times. Madison was Michael's daughter. But what did this have to do with her mother? Why was Michael apologizing to Anne? Digging deeper into the trunk, Eleanor found her mother's diary. She flipped to a dog-eared page. "Michael came by today. He said his wife had a baby girl named Madison. He asked if he should tell my husband about us. I told him no, the past is the past." He cried. "He said I was the only woman he ever truly loved. I pitied him, but I don't regret my choice. I love my husband, and I always will." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Her mother had an affair with Madison's father, and her father had never known. She kept reading. "My husband knows nothing about Michael. If he found out, it would break his heart. I never loved Michael. It was a momentary lapse in judgment, a mistake. But he was obsessed with me for years. Even after he married and had a child, he couldn't let me go. I carry the shame, but I choose my husband every single day." Eleanor closed the diary, shutting her eyes. Too much information. Her mother had a brief affair with Madison's father. And Madison was the woman who had wrecked her marriage. The world was terrifyingly small. On Monday morning, an uninvited guest arrived at the Beacon Hill townhouse. It was Michael Bell. He looked to be in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a cheap windbreaker. He stood at the gate, his eyes red, holding a brown paper bag of fruit like a nervous neighbor. "Are you Eleanor?" he asked in a gravelly voice. "Yes. You must be Michael Bell." Michael froze. You know who I am?" Eleanor buzzed him in. They sat at the patio table in the courtyard. Michael stared at his hands, looking like a child sent to the principal's office. "Ellie," he croaked. "I came to apologize." Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea. She didn't offer him one. "For what?" Michael took a shaky breath. "For Madison. I wronged you. I was the one who told her to go after Simon." Eleanor's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Excuse me?" Michael looked up, tears spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. Madison isn't my biological daughter. My wife had an affair. I raised her for 24 years, but she isn't my blood. I hated her. I hated her mother. I hated everything. He swallowed hard. Then I found out you were Anne's daughter. Anne. Anne was the love of my life. But she chose your father over me. Eleanor's eyes narrowed into slits. I wanted revenge, Michael sobbed. Revenge against your father, against Anne, against the universe that took her from me. So, I manipulated Madison. I fed her information about Simon. I pushed her to seduce him. I wanted your marriage to fall apart so you would feel the pain I felt. Eleanor set her teacup down. Her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. Michael, you orchestrated the destruction of my 5-year marriage to exact revenge on a woman who is already dead? I know I was wrong, Michael wailed. I lost my mind. I thought making you suffer would make Anne regret choosing him, even from the grave. But I was wrong. I destroyed you, and I destroyed Madison. Eleanor stood up and turned her back to him. She stared at the old willow tree her mother had planted in the garden. Michael, do you know what my mother told me right before she died? Michael shook his head, weeping. Eleanor turned back. She said, if a man named Michael Bell ever comes to you, don't trust him. He is a wicked man. Michael flinched as if he had been struck. Eleanor walked slowly toward him, looking down with absolute disdain. You are a wicked man. But she never said she hated you. Do you know why? Because in her heart, you weren't even worth the effort of hatred. Michael buried his face in his hands and wailed. Your obsession destroyed your own life, Eleanor said coldly. Madison isn't your biological daughter. But she bears your name. You used her as bait. Forced her to become a homewrecker. Did you ever stop to think about what would happen to her? Ellie, please. Michael, I'm giving you 2 choices, Eleanor snapped. 1. You walk down to the Boston Police Precinct right now and confess to criminal conspiracy and extortion. 2. I call the police, and my lawyers ensure you and Madison both rot in federal prison. Michael jumped up and lunged for her phone. Eleanor, anticipating the move, sidestepped easily. Michael tripped over his own feet and crashed face first onto the cobblestones. Ellie, no! He screamed, bleeding from his nose. I loved your mother. You can't do this to me. Eleanor dialed 911 and looked down at the pathetic old man. You didn't love my mother. You're just a delusional narcissist who destroyed everyone around him because a woman rejected you. She walked into the house and locked the door. Outside, the sirens began to wail in the distance, drowning out Michael's pathetic sobbing. Eleanor leaned against the wall, looking up at the high ceiling. Why are men so ridiculous? She thought. They think their love is so monumental, their hatred so justified. But in the end, they are nothing. 3 months later, the gavel fell in Suffolk County Superior Court. Dr. Simon Pierce was convicted of medical fraud and chart forgery. Because it was his first criminal offense, he was sentenced to 1 year in state prison, suspended for 2 years of strict probation. He was ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution and an $800,000 fine to the state medical board. He was utterly bankrupt. The management team Eleanor installed at Pierce Medical Solutions fired Peter Pierce entirely. Simon was forced to take a minimum wage job loading boxes at a logistics warehouse, just to cover the interest on his court-mandated debts. He lived in a dingy basement apartment in South Boston. Madison's sentence was much harsher. For her role in academic fraud, forging official testing documents, and attempted conspiracy to commit extortion, she was sentenced to 18 months in a state correctional facility. She didn't appeal because she couldn't afford a public defender who cared. Her mother completely disowned her. Michael Bell was currently sitting in a county jail awaiting trial for criminal conspiracy and extortion. On the day Madison was transferred to the state prison, she stood in shackles by the heavy steel gates and looked back at the sky. The sun was shining. She remembered a year ago, fresh out of med school, wearing her pristine white coat. Everyone called her a rising star. She had 2 paths. Study hard, pass her boards, and become a surgeon. Or take a shortcut by sleeping her way to the top with a married man. She took the shortcut. Now, her life was over before it even began. Dr. Victor Zeller, now the official chief of surgery, was awarded Physician of the Year. His portrait hung proudly in the main lobby of Boston Metropolitan Hospital. He smiled a wide, victorious smile. Dr. Ian Kendall, the man who actually got Madison pregnant, was thrown out of his house by his terrifying wife, Lucille. Left with nothing, he ended up working at a sketchy urgent care clinic in a strip mall, his salary completely garnished by alimony. As for Eleanor, she had transformed her mother's Back Bay commercial property into a state-of-the-art, boutique women's health clinic. She was the sole owner and lead physician. Opening day was a massive success. Dozens of her former hospital colleagues, old patients, and Harvard Med alumni attended the gala. Dr. Zimmerman brought a bottle of rare vintage Bordeaux. He clinked his glass against Eleanor's and whispered, "Ellie, you were ruthless." Eleanor smiled over the rim of her glass. "Ruthless? I think I was perfectly fair." Zimmerman chuckled. Simon Pierce is done for. But he dug his own grave. The clinic was breathtaking. Housed in a historic brownstone, it featured exposed brick, modern art, and over $200,000 worth of imported 4D ultrasound equipment. Eleanor hired 2 top-tier nurse practitioners and a brilliant office manager. By her 3rd week in practice, she received a VIP patient, a 42-year-old, executive pregnant with her 2nd child. She had been unhappy with the crowded waiting rooms at the corporate hospitals and was referred to Eleanor by a wealthy friend. During the exam, Eleanor discovered the baby was breech and recommended a scheduled C-section. The patient was nervous. "Dr. Sterling, I know you used to work at Mass General. Are your surgical skills sharp?" Eleanor smiled warmly. "Don't worry, I was there for 6 years, performed over 1,000 surgeries, and have a flawless M&M record." Unlike some people, she didn't name names, but the patient understood. Her husband worked in healthcare administration and had followed the Simon Pierce scandal closely. "Dr. Sterling, I trust you completely," the woman said, squeezing her hand. The surgery was scheduled for Friday morning. Eleanor operated seamlessly. Her anesthesiologist was a trusted old colleague she had poached from Boston Metro. In 40 minutes, the patient delivered a perfectly healthy, 8-pound baby boy. His cries echoed strongly through the OR. The patient's husband was waiting outside. Hearing his son cry, he wept with joy, grabbing Eleanor's hands and thanking her profusely. After scrubbing out, Eleanor looked at her reflection in the locker room mirror. She was 32. There were faint laugh lines forming around her eyes, but they shone with a fierce, undeniable light. She remembered her mother's final words. "Ellie, you have to live a better life than I did." She had done it. That afternoon, Eleanor drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery to visit her mother's grave. She placed a massive bouquet of white chrysanthemums against the polished granite headstone. "Mom," she said softly, "I put Michael Bell in jail. You were right. He was a wicked man." A gentle autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak trees, scattering orange and red across the manicured grass. "I opened the clinic, Mom. I'm my own boss now. I don't ever have to shrink myself to make a man feel tall again." She knelt down and brushed a fallen leaf off her mother's engraved name. "I got divorced. He turned out to be a pathetic liar. He got involved with Michael Bell's daughter. But it doesn't matter anymore. I took out the trash." She stood up, smoothing down her tailored trench coat. "I have to get back to the clinic, Mom. I'll visit again soon." Eleanor turned and walked down the cobblestone path. The afternoon sun bathed her in golden light. At the cemetery gates, her pristine white BMW X7 was waiting. She climbed into the driver's seat and pushed the ignition. The car glided out of the cemetery gates. Her phone buzzed over the Bluetooth interface. It was her clinic manager. "Dr. Sterling, your next consultation is here early. Are you on your way?" "I know, I'm just down the road," Eleanor smiled. She hung up and rolled down the window. The crisp New England air blew through her hair. In the rearview mirror, the cemetery grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind a bend in the road. Eleanor pressed the gas pedal. The car merged onto the wide highway, flanked by vibrant autumn trees. The sun reflected off the asphalt, making the road look like a river of gold. She felt it in her bones. Her life was finally truly hers. No more Simon, no more Madison, no more hiding her brilliance behind a mediocre man's name. Just her practice, and the wide-open road ahead.